Hello and welcome to the Unusual Stories podcast. My name is Wojciech Salski, I'll be your host for today. And before we begin, as per usual, if you find this podcast useful, if you think this is something worth having for the future, then please do a follow, subscribe, and share it with a friend or, maybe a family member or a colleague from work. It goes a long way. It's truly the best way to advertise anything. And as well, it doesn't cost anything at all. So, just a bit of goodwill and few clicks. And it means a lot to me. So, if you think you'd like to support, wonderful. Please do. And if you'd like to support me in any other way, maybe by contributing to my podcast or sending me an email or commenting on one of the posts or episodes, just with a pat on the back kind of a message, or maybe some criticism, as well, then please do. And as well, thank you very much for all of you who are supporting and all of my patrons out there and basically those that avidly listen. And isn't it why we're doing it? To maybe elevate our understanding of the world. That's at least my purpose here, I feel, because quite frankly, as we've discussed a couple of times before, it seems to me that when we have to put ideas into concepts understandable for others, we allow ourselves to understand these things better. So in many ways, when I do prepare an episode for you, and then I jump on this bandwagon of freestyling, really, even though I have some notes, maybe on my screen or somewhere next to me, I'm quite frankly freestyling in many ways, and I'm wrestling with these ideas, and I have to face them as they present themselves to me. So I want to make sure that I'm making them presentable to you, and I think it's a fair challenge from time to time. So thank you once more for being here with me. And before we start, just maybe a disclaimer. In comparison to the other two books in this season of controversial books, I don't think this one's going to be that controversial. So, or maybe we've even done 3 already, I don't know. I don't think this is that much controversial. It's quite funny. I was thinking, what other books to present to you in this additional season, a mini season really. And this book popped up for me as one that I should have done a long time ago, and I didn't. And then I thought, well, why did I not do it in the first place? And funnily enough, even though it is not controversial, it certainly is a topic outlandish enough for some to consider absurd, which is why I think initially I omitted it from my list, because I was thinking, well, maybe it might be a bit too far, a bridge too far for us to go. But then, I've read this book a year and a half ago, or maybe 2 years now. So time changed, I changed, hopefully we all changed for the better. I matured definitely in many ways, and I've come to realize that it doesn't really matter, especially in connection or in juxtaposition to the last week's or the previous week's episodes. This book might just be a chill walk in the park kind of a book, although I'm not planning to make it so. So the topic itself is going to be quite serious still. It's just that it might not be something one would say it's controversial just off the top of our head, just because. So the book that I would like to present to you today, and I have some notes both with me and on screen, so please don't be worried when I'm sort of looking in and out of the screen as I go, and I might be yet again riffing a bit too much, especially when I'm looking on my notes. I'll try to keep the time to the hour, not like last week. The book that I would like to present to you today is a book by Dr. Brian Weiss, which is Many Lives and Many Masters. So a little context maybe before we start. I've encountered the book by pure chance. If you believe in chance, I would say it's synchronicity. I found it on a shelf in a bookshop, and it sort of drew my attention, and I've decided to give it a go. And then later on, I also had a chance to discuss it with some of my friends, and especially one of them, and also discuss the idea behind it. And since the favorite of yours in terms of the episodes is the Sogyal Rinpoche's Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which I'll refer to today quite a bit, and the second best is the Letting Go, quite frankly, this book might just be what we're looking for in this podcast. So, it's definitely a book about spirituality, about faith, about reincarnation, and that's a topic that I would like to explore in depth today and sort of give you some ideas to think about, and then maybe, invite you to reconsider whether or not you'd like to read the book, because I would encourage you to do so if you find this episode interesting. But the context of the book itself is a sort of a memoir of this doctor who, over the course of, I think, 37 or like 50 different sessions with his patient, through the techniques of, hypnotization, sort of delved into the subconscious of that, I think it was a woman, and basically they've explored some of her past lives and memories from past lives. So she had a lot of trauma, a lot of unresolved trauma, and she struggled with many different problems. And over time, as they went through the therapy and he tried the hypnosis on her, it turned out that she's very prone to it. So apparently there is a percentile of people that are very prone to being hypnotized. It's sort of, they're more sensitive to it, and they sort of, over the course of the book, you get a chance of exploring the different memories and sort of recounts of experiences of that woman through these sessions that they hold. And the book itself is written in the form of a memoir, so it's a very easy read. It's very interesting. I found it fascinating, and also something that was completely, sort of, yet again, in contrast to what I've been taught from a young age in terms of faith and the tradition. And let's keep it at that. I don't want to share too much, so you get the chance to enjoy the book yourself. So what we'll do today is, yet again, as per usual, I'll have a few notes for you, a few topics to discuss, and after these topics I also have one invitation in particular that sort of comes out of this exploration. So my first sort of topic to explore is the power of past life regression therapy itself. So the interesting thing here, and as I said, it might be a topic that for you sounds outlandish, maybe out of the blue, maybe slightly off topic in a way. Bear with me. I think in many ways, as we tend to do on this podcast, I'd like you to challenge yourself to be open to these ideas and to take them with a grain of salt, but also to not allow yourself to be so cynical about it that you just turn off and you stop, engaging. Because quite frankly, it seems to me that even if at minimum there is a grain of truth in everything, then that grain of truth is for us to find. And I think this book is just one of those that, for someone completely unaware of these traditions and cultural sort of implications of reincarnation, which are present and visible in different faiths and religions around the world and traditions, it might just be slightly, weird, slightly different, but it doesn't mean that there isn't something that we can learn from exploring these ideas. So the first topic that I'd like to share with you, and I'll start with a quote I've taken a note of when I was reading the book initially, is this: hypnosis is an excellent tool to help a patient remember long forgotten incidents. So apparently, as I said, it's because our subconscious, and we've talked about that extensively before, so please do refer to the books of such as The Maps of Meaning or the description of the letting go that we've done before. Our subconscious is this sort of, I like to call it the higher self, and I don't know, some people would argue that if it's a subconscious, then it's sub, so it's under. So calling it higher is a sort of an oxymoronic idea. But it seems to me that we have the conscious and unconscious state, and this is sort of, let's say, assumed and considered both scientifically and, in terms of religions and cultural sort of traditions. And the conscious is basically the more logical, the experience you are having right now as you listen to me. And so when you consider what the consciousness entails, it's probably all the sensory inputs, how you feel, what you hear, how everything looks. Maybe there is also some thoughts that are coming up for you, and you're consciously thinking them in a sense that they show up and you have a chance to face them. But then, if you think about it, the best way to describe the subconscious is what's missing here. So, for example, I believe that the conscious thoughts emerge from the subconscious self. One could call it an Atman or a soul, whatever you want to call it, subconscious, maybe, literally, your background noise, or the ocean of potentiality. I like that from Deepak Chopra. The idea is that even though your consciousness is able to sort of recognize these things and maybe react to them and potentially, choose what to act upon and what not, the subconscious is the part that plays a greater role in what you choose from and how you choose it. So in a way, even though we might feel that the conscious part of you is the one that is doing the bidding, making the choices, your implicit biases and your trauma and, previous experiences that you might not even remember at this point consciously are still playing a part today in the way that you react and act with these things consciously. So it's the paradox of this, sort of idea, this phenomena, is that it seems like there isn't much we can do to recognize these, and this is the space in which, I guess, in many ways, scientific and religious collides and interlinks in many ways. So Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud were the notable sort of experimenting gentlemen that were trying to delve into this unconscious and subconscious. Obviously, Jung had a much more willing approach to it. So from Jung's perspective, and please refer to the episode about Jung's memoir. From Jung's perspective, the subconscious and conscious were similar to the way the spiritual and the godlike versus the ego-like states are, while Freud seemed to take everything as black or white, and in many ways it seems like Freud wasn't open enough to explore the ideas that Jung wanted to explore further. And I don't know who was right. Maybe neither of them were. They definitely advanced our ability to perceive and describe these states. And so as the psychoanalysis and sort of psychological treatment progressed, one of the tools that became apparent and, for instance, was notably used by Freud was the sort of hypnosis of the patient, and Jung would participate in that as well. So the idea is you allow the person to go into a subconscious state. Usually they sort of they're in like a dreamlike state, and in that space you try to get the answers out from the subconscious mind without the conscious mind sort of interfering and stopping. And this is the space in which Dr. Weiss found these past lives experiences of his patient. So not only did it allow him to access the memories from previous lives, and apparently from what I remember it was something like 20, 25 or even 35 of different lifetimes that the woman remembered, but it could also allow the trauma to be resolved and for the patient to gain a certain level of comfort over these burdens of the past. And the maybe the learning here for us, and the big question to ask ourselves is, what would that mean for us if we would realize, if we would come to terms with, or if we would recognize that we also have had some past lives already, and there are some unresolved traumas both from us or maybe our ancestors, our parents, that are still dwelling within us. And many of these things are obviously, as I mentioned earlier, subconscious. So in many ways, you don't know what you don't know, which is why it's such a complex topic. And psychoanalysis in general is, to quite an average layman like Joe, without much experience in psychology other than the books that I've been reading and maybe lectures I've been listening to, especially from Jordan Peterson, it sounds like a very complex and difficult to describe and to grasp space, even though I might be inclined to assume that I do understand myself quite well. So this is the interesting thing I'd like to ask you is, first of all, how much do you think you know about yourself? And have you had an experience of recognizing that there are some subconscious attitudes or, tics, icks, and habits that you might have? Maybe there is a certain way you think or a certain way you do something that if now I'm asking you about it, you wouldn't be able to explain to me why you do what you do. And of course, on the most surface-like level, these can be just silly habits that we take on from our parents without realizing. Maybe there was a certain way your family would set the table for dinner, and then you just took this at face value. This is how I set the table. And then as you grow older and maybe you get involved with someone, you get married and whatnot, and you move in together, you will be faced with this fact, because it turns out that the way you would set up the table is completely absurd to the other person. And obviously this is just a trivial example, but I have no doubt each of us has these, especially on the surface level, these habits within us. And so similarly, it could be fair to assume that there is a certain number of subconscious habits and ways of being, potentially some traumas as well, that you might be carrying with you without realizing what they are and what they stand for. So this book, if anything, to me especially, triggered these ideas, these thoughts. I was thinking especially, do I remember or do I feel drawn to anything so deeply that it potentially would indicate that I used to do such thing, So, for example, I was very interested when I was younger, especially inspired by one of my uncles in the military, and the idea of being a soldier and stuff like that. And, obviously, being a soldier is probably over the millennia of our civilizations one of the most popular and most likely activity a man would do at some point in the history of humankind. And, who knows? I do wonder, and I did wonder as I read the book, whether I do have some past life where I had a chance or the troublesome, unlikely pleasure of participating in such endeavor. And whether or not this is something true, I have no clue. And this is the part that I leave to you to discuss. But I'd like to delve deeper right now into the idea of reincarnation itself, and maybe the implication of it for us, because depending on what religion, what denomination, what tradition you might be coming from to listen to this, reincarnation might sound completely off the books for you, or it might be something that it's an obvious and resounding yes. So, for example, according to the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, the book itself, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying of Sogyal Rinpoche's, the one we've discussed, and I'll put the link below for you for that episode to explore. It's definitely one of the best ones. It is a straightforward, well, maybe not so straightforward, but definitely a straightforward in a way, in its aim, guide to the experience of reincarnation. And so there is a tradition that explains the different bardos, which are the different levels maybe of existence. And there is no doubt in that particular tradition of Tibetan Buddhism that once you die, your Atman is taken through the next bardos. So depending on your actions and depending on your karmic, balance, you go into the next bardo loop, or maybe you become enlightened. And a big part of it is to learn yourself, your conscious self, over the time of your life, pretty much by heart, the verses from the book. So as it is read to you as you're dead in a room, your Atman is more likely to recognize it as true. And if they do, then it has a chance of becoming enlightened. So I know it sounds, especially if you've never heard this idea before, it might sound slightly outlandish. In the tradition that I was brought up in terms of like a Christian, maybe Catholic, Roman Catholic faith in Poland, reincarnation was only reserved for Jesus, who not reincarnated, rather resurrected, right? He sort of was, he died, but he didn't die, and then he went to heaven. So for me, exploring this concept at the very beginning was most importantly curious and interesting. That's the whole point. I think I have quite a high level of openness and curiosity, which is why I'm so interested in things that are so different to what I've been, inspired to consider from the very beginning. But there is a very practical implication of this reincarnation and soul evolution I'd like to leave you with. And so first, the quote from the book that I've taken note of before is, "Our task is to learn, to become godlike through knowledge. We know so little. You are here to be my teacher. I have so much to learn. By knowledge we approach God, and then we can rest. Then we come back to teach and help others." And so here obviously it's written as if someone's telling us something. It's a quote because the patient is speaking to the doctor while being in this sort of hypnotic state. And so one could argue it's not the patient talking, rather the Atman, the soul itself, explaining, maybe the higher consciousness explaining to the lower consciousness, as we are in our conscious state, what is going on. And the way I think about it in terms of reincarnation and this soul evolution, what resonates with me about this idea is that there is this idea of extreme ownership, right? Like in Christian tradition, you should bear the cross and go with Jesus. So, for example, you should take on the burden of your life voluntarily. You should take on the challenge and sort of go forth with it. And I would argue that the idea that there is not only this lifetime, but many other lifetimes, both past and future, which your soul is going through as it advances in its, spiritual awareness, we have to not only deal with the burden of this life, but also the burden of all the past lives and the burdens of all the future lives. So I would argue it's an extension of the same idea. It's just one could say a greater burden, because if I'm not only responsible for Wojtek today, Wojtek yesterday and Wojtek tomorrow, but also for all the other different existences that my soul, which is not obviously Wojtek, it's some, the deepest of the deepest parts of me, on a journey towards enlightenment, then I have even a greater, let's say, responsibility to try and explore these ideas and try to understand how can I make myself better for the future selves to come. And from the perspective of the Tibetan Buddhism, from their tradition, for example, I remember that the emphasis was placed on the fact that we are being in the bardo of human existence. We are actually best equipped to recognize our spiritual state and advance our spirituality and our soul's venture, because we are not only sentient, but we also can reflect on these really deep ideas that allow us to enhance our understanding of what is yet to come and what happened before. Obviously this is quite a stretch for any of us to assume, potentially in slight arrogance, that simply by engaging with these deep and important scriptures, we can advance ourselves so far. As we've explored with David Hawkins' work, the average soul will not advance more than something like 5 points on the scale of 1 to 1,000 during one's lifetime. But still, these 5 points are for you to take. And the reincarnation as a greater emphasis on one's responsibility in this space is something that for me resonates as an encouraging and an important factor. So it is also maybe slightly overbearing. One could say that it's, you could see it as an opportunity to learn and advance yourself more. It can also be seen as an additional load that you need to carry, and depending on which side of the barricade you might stand right now in terms of your willingness to take on the responsibility voluntarily and carry it, you might find this more or less appealing. For me, seeing how my life has been slowly but surely changing to a better, I would argue, over the past few years, since I've really made an effort to take responsibility for my actions and also take on the challenge voluntarily of, living my greatest potential, whatever that means. It sounds encouraging to know that this is not only helping me in this life, but also all the next ones or all the past ones. So it might sound like a heresy for some, and maybe that's why this episode is a controversial one, even though I would argue it's not that controversial to talk about these topics. But even though I do believe in many forms of this idea of the highest power and God, it sounds true and encouraging for me to know that with my karmic baggage that I'm carrying through this soul's evolution, by being aware and explore these ideas, I can help my future soul's evolution journey. So, the invitation, maybe a question for you here is, how does that make you feel if you got to know today that you're not only carrying the burden and responsibility of helping yourself in this life and obviously those around you that you care for, but also all of your future selves and potentially all of your past selves and your ancestors? Is this something that makes you, sort of shudder in a worry, or is it something that feels so wrong that you don't even want to consider it? Is it something that fills you with hope and encouragement? These are the ideas that I'd like you to ponder. Now, on this topic, before we go further, I'd like to talk about the obvious elephant in the room when we talk about reincarnation, right? I've recently talked with my girlfriend about the fact that in many ways, I would argue that it's an obvious statement to make. Humans have the tendency to come up with explanations to things that we don't understand. And one of these things is death, of course. So, death is if not the most foremost, it certainly is at the forefront of any major tradition and faith and religion out there. Whether the tradition dismisses faith as non-existent or considers faith to be just another, opening of another chapter, or praising, death for being the ultimate, maybe God. Depending on the tradition, depending on the culture, you might find that the attitude is different. For example, in the Christian tradition, death is seen as a transition to the next stage. But obviously the next stage is either hell or heaven. There doesn't seem to be the next, life. There's just the eternal life in complete bliss or in complete misery. Then you have traditions such as the Tibetan Buddhism, where death is simply a point at which the soul goes through to the next stage, but the stage itself is truly another stage. Whether it's that you are reborn as a human again, or maybe you're reborn as an animal or a spirit, stuff like that. Whatever you want to think about death, we don't know until we get there, right? So in the context of reincarnation, there is definitely the encouraging part for all of us that do not want to accept the fact that one day, not so far into the future, we will no longer be here physically. There is obviously the encouragement and reassuring of a sort that there will be another way that we will be here. From a physical standpoint, it seems that physics could reassure us that since nothing in nature, is fully destroyed, it simply changes state. Our matter, if we would consider ourselves to be purely material, our matter will simply be transformed into something else, and yet again that could be considered a supposition that we will not die, we will simply be transformed into a different being. What do you think? Because for me, as I'm thinking about these ideas and what sounds right for me and what I resonate with, the one and truly deep idea that I wrestle with as a right one, maybe, is that even though our inner core, our being of the soul, does not die with us dying, the existence that we dwell in right now here on earth, in these years that we are here, does die to us. So in a way, it's like a dream that ends. And, there are traditions that compare life to a dream. There are multiple cultural both jokes and serious ideas that assume that in many ways maybe we are dead and we are simply dreaming right now that we are alive, that or maybe the theory of multi-universe existence in which there are all the possibilities happening simultaneously. In many ways that could potentially be also reincarnation, right? we could be simultaneously all of these and all of the other lives, and we wouldn't know necessarily what's true. Maybe you are living in a simulation. Whatever that is, my point here that I took note of that I'd like to share with you is that it seems to me that we should for the sake of becoming better people, and for the sake of being better for others, for the sake of being better for ourselves, we should befriend death. And I know this sounds maybe somewhat morbid, I don't know. Is that how it sounds? My encouragement to you is to really consider what would it mean for you not to be here tomorrow. I don't think about it all the time, but especially for the past few years, as I've been, more and more considering the passage of time, and obviously with me growing older, all of people around me are growing older, and some of them are growing older to the point that one could expect, death to be knocking on our doors. And especially observing, experiencing, and you've had a chance to listen to some of these episodes over the past, over this year, some of my friends experiencing the death of their father or stuff like that. I don't want to lie to myself. I'm aware that it's all coming. It's the one, if not the only certainty of life. And what's on the other side, you could consider and you could reassure yourself with it, or maybe you could motivate yourself to a certain degree with the ideas regarding that. But my more pressing question to you would be, what would it mean for you today to realize you're not going to be here tomorrow? Like, what would you do different in this conscious state if you knew you're not coming back tomorrow? Who would you express love to? Who would you hug? What would you do? Where would you go? These are the ideas and questions that I sometimes wrestle with when thinking about these things. There was some sort of advertising campaign when I was a kid in Poland, and I'm pretty sure it was something to do with cancer treatment, but my mom claims it was with accidents on the road. It doesn't really matter what was it about. There was a sentence there from one of our poets that stated something like, hurry up to love people because they go away so quickly, they pass away so quickly, so hurry up loving them. And I remember it made a huge impression on me, to the point that here I am probably 25 years later mentioning it. And I know that especially, I don't know, it's been quite a few years now, I don't know for how long, but I've been making more conscious effort of expressing my love to my family and to my close friends from this standpoint, from this idea that, I don't know what's coming tomorrow. For all I know, an asteroid could hit this room right now and it wouldn't be no more. Obviously, if you're listening to this, then it didn't, because it's not like I'm automatically uploading the podcast. But the point here is, if there is anything at all that you would do differently, knowing that death is near, or if there is anything you would like to do differently today, thinking that this will help you in the future lives, or this will help your past lives, why not do it? This is the maybe slightly too serious and morbid, but certainly necessary idea for us to consider. So I would encourage you to gaze into this abyss and to voluntarily face these ideas and see what happens. Consider them for yourself as something worth considering. So finally, I'd like to talk about the idea of spiritual guides and masters, because that's the one thing. That's the one thing that in the book really stuck with me as a very different thing that I expected. So imagine this: the main character, the protagonist of the book, the patient. From what I remember, she had some troubles with her husband, and she didn't see her father for a while and whatnot. And then in the course of the therapy, they discovered that not only does she remember her past lives, but she also recognizes in the past life of hers, in one or two, I don't remember, she recognizes the same people, the same souls interlinked in different lives. And what was most mind-blowing to me was the idea that, for example, in this life, someone could be your father, while in another life they could be the soul that is your lover, your husband, for example. Or in this life, someone is your brother, while in another life he was a person that killed you. And so this was a very shocking part of the book that was explored. And for me, it was particularly interesting because if I do believe and consider the impact that relationships and people around me have on my life, and if I do dare to consider reincarnation as a spiritual fact, then I was wondering who of the people around me right now were there with me before. And I do have a few people in my life that it seems like whatever happens, our relationship just works. And even if we, fight and stuff, it seems like we've always known one another. And I know you've had this experience before. But everyone did. Sometimes you meet someone, and for whatever reason, you seem to know them as if they're your old-time friend. Well, I mean, I wouldn't straight away jump now to the conclusion that whoever evokes such emotions in me is truly an old-time friend from another past life. But if I do exercise this idea, then first of all, it's truly wonderful to think such things, and I think it's quite a beautiful, lovely thing to think about another. But with the context of what Brian Weiss talks about and what the book suggests, it doesn't sound like an outlandish idea at all. Quite frankly, it might be quite an obvious fact that maybe your husband or your best friend have been with you in another past life before. What does that mean for us? I don't know. But what it made me think about, and what the book encouraged, is that we should not ignore whatever lessons experiences with others have to offer us, because we don't know who might be our next spiritual guide or a teacher or master, right? Many Lives, Many Masters is the book's title. And this is a topic that is also touched there. So, the concept of masters in the book itself introduces these advanced spiritual beings. So, an idea maybe of an angel or of a sort, who impart wisdom and guidance through individuals during regression sessions. And that's the voice that sort of is responding at times through the subconscious mind of the patient. But then the book takes it further and discusses whether or not our interactions with others and the way we interact with one another is also in a way a guiding, exploration of the spiritual. So, there is a saying, as you sow, so shall you reap, or, that you give a certain energy to people and you'll get a certain energy back. I truly believe that. I think that's, if there is one thing that is a universal law, is that whatever you give to the world, you get. I'm pretty sure that's basically how we operate. And if we take into consideration that maybe some people in our lives have been in our lives before, in our previous lives, and on top of that, maybe some of them are here to help us learn throughout this life and take that lesson forward to the next, then we will not only cherish these relationships more, but we will also potentially be more open to whatever they bring along. So, my invitation here for you is to just appreciate the myriad of people that you have around you that care about you, quite frankly, because that's, if you think about it, in all your uselessness, it's quite amazing that people care. I certainly think so. Sometimes I feel humbled when I realize just how many people wish me well, even though they have no reason other than just wishing me well, maybe because they appreciate something about me. And as fragile and useless as I am from time to time, and I bet you're a great person, but I can imagine that you also are struggling with many things. Isn't it amazing that we have these things and people around us that truly do, care? And in a way, they are our guardian angels. Maybe it's a friend that tells you not to do something stupid and they save your life or they save your face because of it. Or maybe it is a loved one that reassures you on the day that you feel you're worse. And thanks to that, you don't feel you're worse anymore. So these are not things to ignore or disregard, I think. If we do disregard them, we disregard them to our peril. And I think the invitation here would be to recognize that, recognize that in our limited ability to lead a useful life and a worthy one, with all the burden that we're carrying and with all the challenges and opportunities that we're faced with, there are those around us that help us throughout this journey. And that's truly wonderful. I think it's a true blessing, So, on this note, a fun fact that I just wanted to mention, but I didn't want to interrupt myself earlier, is apparently there is this idea that birthmarks that you might have, maybe you have a little pimple here or there, and a type of birthmarks might indicate that these used to be, for example, places on your body that you were injured in your past life with. Maybe you died because of someone's sword there where you have a pimple. I don't know. This is just a fun fact that popped into my head recently as I was preparing for this episode, and I decided it's fairly consistent with what we're discussing here. Finally then, I would like to leave you with this invitation for the week. Of course, the first invitation is read the book. I think if this topic is interesting for you, and if you found the other episodes such as Maps of Meaning or the Book of Living and Dying or Letting Go interesting, then this one is certainly for you. The second one is, consider this. What, if anything, would you do differently today if you knew you would be dead tomorrow? Really consider it. What would you do differently today if you knew that tomorrow is no more? I know this is not the easiest of the challenges, and it certainly is not the most pleasurable of an invitation, but it can also be very inspirational and aspirational for you. And so I wish that that's going to be the case. It seems to me that it is worth to consider these ideas from time to time and see what they bring to us because of such consideration taking place. So, yeah. Thank you so much for joining me for this, spiritual adventure. If you'd like to support the podcast, then please follow the link below or subscribe, and follow. It goes a long way, as I said. Other than that, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.